Poll. If his approval drops below 50% before November, it'll be the third fastest drop since Gallup began tracking presidential approval. How much do polls figure into how politics is played? Let's ask our political insiders. Matt Mackowiak is the former communications director to Republican Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and Julian Epstein is the former Democratic counsel to the House Judiciary Committee. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Julian, is it a case of he was so high there was nowhere else to go coming in?
Partly, he's come from the stratosphere now back to reality, but I think there's two things that he has to do. One is he has to talk about and take more credit for the economic recovery. Most economists, including conservative economists, are saying the economic recovery plan is working. The second thing is he campaigned on changing politics, and this comes up in the healthcare debate, and people like that. People like that he's taken the partisan vitriol out of politics, or that he's trying to. But people also want a tough leader as well. And sometimes these two goals of changing politics, taking the partisanship out, and being a tough leader, the way Clinton kind of took no prisoners, sometimes these two goals are in conflict, and he's got to resolve these, and I think he'll find the sweet spot in the healthcare debate. Hasn't done it yet, but I think he's starting to.
Matt, he did campaign on change, but now a lot of people are pushing back saying maybe we're not up for some of these exact changes. I mean, massive healthcare reform and some other things. I mean, he's really got a heavy full plate right now.
That's right. Maybe it's too much change too soon. Charlie Cook, the respected political observer, wrote about that. The massive job loss that we've seen has, I think, given a lot of people pause. I do think that President Obama's popularity was personal when he was elected. He was elected based on the change that he could bring in. He has not brought that much change, although certainly the amount of deficit and the amount of debt that we've seen is historic. I think clearly the concern he has politically right now is on the economy and on health care. Contrary to what Julian just said, I think it's a very open question as to whether the stimulus has had the type of effect they promised that it would. It is the most expensive bill in history, and only about 10% has been spent so far. It was so important that members of Congress couldn't even have time to read it. And then on health care, you know, he has 53% of disapproval with him on health care. So he's going to have to really make some progress on health care and on the economy over the next 6 months, or it's going to be a very difficult midterm re-election year for his congressional Democrats.
Well, I think he can more than take credit for what's happening in the economy. We were looking at negative 6% growth when he came in. We're now looking at a situation where we're probably outside of the recession. We've recovered from the recession. We're back into positive growth probably in this quarter. Most of the analysts on Wall Street are saying it's the economic recovery, the Obama economic recovery plan that's responsible for that, and you've got lots of conservative economists on record saying that. So I think he can take a lot of credit for what's happening with the economic turnaround. On health care, what he has to do is what he should have done 3 months ago, which is he's got to get the liberals in the party together with the moderates in the party and probably a couple of reasonably minded Republicans like Matt and cut a deal. And he's got to cut a deal. It's got to be an understandable deal. And then when he cuts that deal, that's the changing politics part. That's the getting the partisan vitriol part of politics out. Once he cuts the deal, he then has to sell the deal with a take-no-prisoners kind of approach, and he's got to be tough in doing that.
Well, Matt, let me ask you, has he had a misstep in that there was some talk that they were trying to avoid the repeat of the Clinton attempt at health care reform, that he wasn't micromanaging it, that he allowed a lot of this to be drafted on Capitol Hill and kind of kept himself out of direct involvement? Was that a plus or a minus now as this plays out?
I think there's a lot of merit to the argument that he overlearned the lessons of the Clinton health care debacle. If you remember, Hillary had a secret task force, wrote the bill at the White House and sort of dropped it on the Hill and said, take it or leave it, and Capitol Hill said, leave it. What Obama's done is he's sort of stayed above the fray, put some principles out there and said, you guys do the work. And they've done the work. The problem is that the American people are not in favor so far of the specifics of the bill. There's a lot of concern about it. I do think there's a possibility for a bipartisan compromise. I do think that. I think that Ted Kennedy's death may play a role in that. I think if Democrats are serious, they could remove the public option and add in tort reform. And if they do that and fix a couple small things in the bill, I think it's possible you could get 60 or 70 votes.
All right.
I actually agree that Democrats did misread 1993. I think the lesson of 1993 is that you cut a deal early. You get the committee chairman together with the Blue Dogs and the moderates and a couple of Republicans. You cut the deal early, you make sure it's understandable, and you sell it. That said, I think we're close to something that looks like a deal. I think that we can get regulation of the insurance industry so you get them stopping the wrongful denial of coverage, together with universal coverage by expanding some of the existing programs like Medicaid, Medicare, and I think those two things would be sweeping reforms. You may throw in a couple things like some minor tort reform, and I think you get some Republican support, and you've got a major bill in your hands and a major victory for the president.
All right, we've got to leave it there. Julian and Matt, thank you both for your debate today.